As lockdowns begin to ease for millions of Europeans, Italy reports a spike in deaths. Migrants face roundups in Malaysia and surging infections in Singapore's dormitories. There's a new reality for places where coronavirus is under control. Parts of the world already live in it. Worshippers at one of Seoul's largest Catholic churches must refrain from singing hymns or saying Amen for fear of spreading saliva. Priests sanitize their hands during communion. Holy water has been removed from the chapel. This should become the new normal from now on, said Gong My-young, 53, who owns a tutoring school and attended Mass one night this week at Myeongdong Church in the South Korean capital. We have to be ready for war. South Korea even has a name for the new practices, everyday life quarantine. The authorities recently released a 68-page guide, offering advice on situations like going to the movies, refrain from shouting, and attending funerals, bow your head instead of hugging. As cities in Asia, Australia and elsewhere get their coronavirus outbreaks under control, churches, schools, restaurants, movie theaters and even sporting venues are starting to open, creating a sense of normalcy for people who have spent weeks and even months in isolation. But they are returning to a world reimagined for the age of coronavirus, where social distancing, hygiene standards and government-imposed restrictions are infused into nearly every activity, a way of life that is likely to persist until a vaccine or a treatment is found. In Hong Kong, tables at restaurants must be spaced at least 5 feet apart and customers are given bags to store their face masks during dining. In China, students face temperature checks before they can enter schools, while cafeteria tables are outfitted with plastic dividers. In South Korea, baseball games are devoid of fans and players can't spit on the field. The new social customs and mandates in Beijing, Hong Kong and Seoul, as well as Sydney, Australia, and Taiwan's capital, Taipei, offer a preview of what might soon be common globally. Meanwhile, for millions of Europeans, buffeted by an economic downturn not seen since the end of World War II, the weekend brought a glimmer of optimism as countries began easing stringent lockdown restrictions. After 7 weeks of a truncated, sometimes claustrophobic existence indoors, Spanish teenagers and adults were allowed to exercise outdoors for the first time, prompting scenes of euphoric joggers in some Spanish cities. Germany, which has already opened small shops, will reopen playgrounds, museums and churches from Monday. See our map of Germany's coronavirus cases. But governments are warning that there won't be a return to business as usual. Spain, which recently passed 25,000 deaths, and France, which is nearing that toll, have announced that wearing face masks will be mandatory in public transportation in the coming weeks, as both countries draw up complex, region-by-region strategies to exit the lockdown. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez said on Saturday that his government would grant €16 billion to help Spain's 17 regions pay for the cost of managing the health crisis and its aftermath. Mr. Sánchez also called on opposition parties to approve another extension of Spain's state of emergency, in line with a plan to gradually return Spain to a new normalcy by late June. In Britain, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, back on the job after recovering from COVID-19 and welcoming a son named after the 2 doctors who saved his life, warned that lifting restrictions too soon could have disastrous consequences. Already the country is poised to overtake Italy as the European country hardest hit by the virus. In London, bus drivers are increasingly fearing for their lives after the deaths of colleagues. See our map of Britain's coronavirus cases. This is the moment when we can press home our advantage, Mr. Johnson said. It is also the moment of maximum risk. And an Ipsos Mori poll this week found that 2/3 of Britons said that even after the lockdown ends, they would feel uncomfortable going to large public gatherings, such as sports or music events. Half felt the same about sending their children to school. The virus's deadly toll is still being strongly felt, even as the number of hospitalized patients continues to decrease in several countries. Italy on Saturday reported 474 new deaths, the biggest increase since April 21, bringing the total to over 28,000. See our map of Italy's coronavirus cases. Olivier Véran, the French health minister, told the newspaper Le Parisien that if the number of cases remained too high, authorities could push the date for easing confinement beyond May 11. On Saturday, the French government announced an extension of a health state of emergency until July 24. See our map of France's coronavirus cases. Learning to live with the virus, that is the goal in the coming weeks and months, said Christophe Castaner, France's interior minister. In Rome, unlike conquests, fires and floods, the coronavirus is clearly not a danger to Rome's beauty. But what will it do to its spirit? Last week, Jason Horowitz, the Rome bureau chief for The Times, went into the city center. The state of the city was, he writes, weird. Campo de' Fiori, a square that is usually home to a bustling, touristy market, was pretty much empty except for a little girl riding her bicycle around the statue of the philosopher and astronomer Giordano Bruno, who was burned alive at the spot in 1600, decades after one of the city's several sackings. With so few cars and people on the streets, the scent of wisteria, draping over ancient defensive walls and garden fences, floats further. At the quiet Ponte Sisto Bridge, usually crowded with street artists, 5 mallards, their necks flashing green, landed in formation to skim on the Tiber in solitude. The answer is likely to come soon. The government will begin loosening Europe's longest lockdown on Monday.